Welcome back into the 14. I'm your host, Chris Lee. This is the Friday edition. We will make this short and sweet because things change just about every minute in college basketball. So, Blake, I think today we're going to hit briefly on the SEC's picture in the NCAA tournament. Then we're going to talk about some of the teams that aren't going to be playing basketball anymore this season and what their future looks like. First of all, with the SEC, as of this morning, I've got Alabama a 2 seed. I've got Arkansas a 3. I've got Tennessee a 5. Some people might push back on that, but I outlined my reasoning for why I've got the Vols at a 5, where a lot of people have them as a 6. I've got Missouri as a 6. I've got LSU as an 8 with the chance to move into a 7 today. I've got Florida as a 9 with the chance to move into an 8 today. And then it's whatever we do with Ole Miss. By the time you hear this, that will probably have changed as some teams have played some games. But quick thoughts on the bracket before we move on to the teams who've ended their seasons, Blake.
Well, good luck trying to figure everything out because I think as we've seen with the chaos at the ACC tournament, there is a lot still to be determined. But I'm with you. You talked about the seeding in terms of where some of the SEC teams are at. That makes sense. I think for Ole Miss, it's very simple at this point. If they win, they're absolutely in. If they lose, I still think there's a shot for them to get in because the bubble, as we always say, it's also about what everyone else does. And quite frankly, the bubble has been very gracious to Ole Miss at this point. Teams that needed to lose have lost. And I think now it's just waiting and seeing and making sure none of those others that are kind of around them are going to, win out or something and put them in a position to maybe knock them out. But I think Ole Miss is going to be in a good spot. Again, even if they lose to LSU, if it's a competitive game, if it goes down to the wire, I still think that there's a good chance that they could potentially get in. But if they win, they are absolutely in. I think, significantly. I don't know what the percentage would be, but I think it's very close to, 90%, 90, whatever. Like, I think they're in at that point. So that's the biggest storyline here is to watch that and really, like I said, this ACC tournament thing, I know we're not covering the ACC, but it is going to impact the rest of college basketball because now we're looking at a situation where the number 1 seed in the ACC tournament, Virginia, is basically in a race against time here to try to see if they're going to be able to meet the protocols in place by the NCAA because I think David Teal, who covers the ACC, just reported that, you've got to submit your medical whatever protocols or however that works by 11 o'clock on Saturday night. So, I mean, that is sort of, we knew this was going to be the thing. We talked about our team's going to pull out of conference tournaments, all this other stuff. I hope this doesn't happen in the SEC, but I'm telling you, this is unfortunately something that we're seeing now sort of play out kind of like we thought it potentially could.
I hate to dive into all this stuff because it gets political, but I just don't know that I agree with canceling a team season because you get one positive test.
Well, and that's, again, I think this is what Virginia's going to run into because I don't know, and what was it, Matt Norlander, I think. Now, I'm going to pull this up real quick because obviously this is something that's pretty significant when it comes to what else could kind of follow Virginia having to forfeit their game. But let's see, I'm going to find this. So Matt Norlander of CBS Sports, he says that the Virginia player who tested positive played in Thursday's game against Syracuse. So, that opens up even more. Now, the NCAA has said, basically, you just need 5 players. I mean, I know that's not going to be ideal, but if you can get, 5 players that consecutively pass that 7 days of negative tests, that's all you need. You don't need more than 5. Now, as we know, a team running through the NCAA tournament with only 5 players is going to be a really hard thing to do, but I think it's interesting because I feel like the scenario is set up here was always set up for failure because I just think there should have been a way to put yourself in a situation where once all these conference tournaments are played, give yourself a week, 10 days, whatever, wiggle room, and then go to the NCAA tournament. Because I think just having to go straight from one to the other was always going to present some problems. And as we've seen in the ACC, it is already presenting problems. Duke's season's over. Virginia, the top seed, is out via forfeit. And so this is just, I think, the circumstances surrounding, I don't know if it's communication. I don't know if it's just the language and everything. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out.
Intramural leagues are going to be scouted like never before in the coming days.
Maybe. Well, listen, that's the thing with Ole Miss, right? Is if you're Ole Miss and you lose to LSU and maybe you're the first team out, well, guess what? This year, you're still technically in. You're an alternate team. Like, you could get placed into this thing before the tournament even starts. So that maybe is another thing for Ole Miss, is that they've played themselves to the point of being this close to the bubble, or either right in or right out at this point, to where, that's a potential possibility. Like, and that's the thing, is like, we're not talking about this just 1% chance type thing anymore. Like, we're saying that as we're seeing some of these tournaments play out, like, it could be a thing where maybe Ole Miss is the first team out, but all of a sudden, before, things get going, they're in. And it's just, man, it's wild. But I think we knew it was going to be wild this season.
Well, back to the normal bubble without COVID. I wonder how many care packages the committee members are getting from like ACC and Big Ten in Mountain West country this week.
Yeah, I know. It's man, this bubble is interesting. And that's what we talked about this already, but I think what the committee does with some of this, and look, it ties into what we just talked about, like with the conference tournament stuff. Like, what do you do now with teams that maybe have had to forfeit spots and all this other stuff? And even if they still play in the tournament, like, I'm very curious to see what this bubble looks like, and I'm curious to see what the committee really values in some of these spots with these bubble teams, because it's just getting interesting. And we're talking here on Friday. We still got a couple of days of basketball that are going to determine a lot of this stuff and see how it plays out on the bubble. But boy, there's some teams that have not done themselves any favors, and that's why I keep saying for Ole Miss, if they beat LSU, they are in, because the other teams around them are just not doing themselves a lot of favors.
Let's talk about some teams whose seasons have ended and where their futures are headed. Obviously, Kentucky didn't come close to meeting expectations. Typical year for Kentucky. It is going to have another banner recruiting class. It'll have some freshmen leave for the NBA, and it added West Virginia's best player, perhaps. So what are things looking like in Lexington going forward, Blake?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, I tell you, because I think that, they've got good players coming in next year. That's no surprise, right? That's just what you expect with this team. Like, they're going to bring in players. I'm sure Cal is going to go out and get a really good grad transfer from somewhere. I feel like that's probably a possibility. Look, the transfer rule, as we know, like, he could go out and get a transfer from anywhere. And, he's already got Oscar Tshiebwe coming in from West Virginia, who's one of their best players on the team. And then he's going to have another, very solid freshman class. Not a solid, but he's going to have a very talented, 5-star class. And so I think it's going to be interesting to see how they bounce back. I've never at any point said that this was going to be a Kentucky team that I thought was going to finish the season with 9 wins. But I did think this could be a team, just looking at them on paper, that was going to struggle, because they just didn't have that it factor you felt like that the, De'Aaron Fox, Malik Monk, Bam Adebayo team had, all those other teams maybe previously that have had so much success. You never felt like this team had that. So I can't say I'm just completely shocked that they struggled. Now, to the extent, absolutely. But I don't know. Like, I think it's the circumstances surrounding this season were so unusual. And we've seen, like, think about all the stuff we talked about that if we just been like, wow, we've never seen this before. We never expect this to happen. I think a large portion of that is due to the circumstances. But I also think this Kentucky team was not constructed to be able to get to a Final Four. I think it's pretty clear based on how they played. I just thought it was, probably one of the worst offensive teams we've seen in Kentucky in a while. And so they'll bounce back. I'm just curious to see, what the roster looks like next season, because he's got some guys that, could very well come back now that didn't do themselves any favors from a draft standpoint. But any way you look at it, I think that they're going to be back, and it's just a matter of seeing, who's on the roster next season.
I think the outlook for Georgia has got to be looking up a little bit. I know the Bulldogs lost to Missouri, pushed them pretty hard in that one. But, I think that this was supposed to be one of the worst teams coming into this season. Georgia was competitive a lot of games, won a lot more than I think most of us thought. He's got a good nucleus of some sophomores there. Yep. Have to think things are looking up a little bit for Tom Crean.
Yeah, I think Georgia fans are kind of split at this point. I don't even know if split's the right number, but I know just, you see the frustrations after your season ends, and I think you see a lot of people look at it and kind of wonder what you're going to have going into next season. I think there's some people that are frustrated maybe that Georgia hasn't gotten as far as they wanted them to, in terms of just being in a situation to win more games. But I don't know. Like I think it's going to be interesting to see too for them because recruiting wise, that's what we said whenever he took the job was that, I mean, hey, he's going to have a recruiting base to choose from and they're going to have an opportunity to get some talent in there. But, you've got to be able to turn that into wins too. And I think that's what is going to be a pretty interesting point for Georgia next season because, you kind of look at where they finished since he's been there thus far. I mean, they haven't really been a team that's finished, very high in the rankings. I want to say, what was it? This year they finished 10th. If you go back, the past couple seasons, they won 2 games in the SEC in his first season there. They won 5 games in his second season, and now, they bounce back and win 7. So, like, the trajectory is heading in the right direction. Like we say, though, it's just a matter of what do you do to kind of separate yourself from the other teams at the top. Now that Alabama and Arkansas have jumped up, like we said, Kentucky should bounce back. You don't really think Tennessee or Florida are going anywhere. Same with LSU, if that situation stays the same. So it's just all those different things. And I wonder, what's it going to take for Georgia to kind of crack into that top 5 in the SEC? I don't know that that's going to be next season, but the thing is, they've got some good young talent that they should have back, and they can build around that, bring in some guys, transfers, and that kind of stuff. I think that's what makes this in college basketball now. It makes the offseason so hard to predict because we know the transfer situation. There's so many now that one of them can completely alter the outlook of the season. So I think that makes it really hard. But I do think it's going to be. I don't want to say like it's an important season next year, but maybe it is just in a sense from a fan support standpoint. I think Georgia needs to make some moves next year to try to get back up into that top half. If they don't, I think there will be some frustrated fans.
Yeah, I agree with you. I do think that Georgia has got to probably go to the NCAA tournament because, I mean, let's look at Tom Crean's record, and this is where it gets hard to overcome the hole you dig. And maybe that's hard because Tom Crean didn't come into Kentucky, right?
Yeah.
But Georgia goes 2-16 in the league the first year, 5-13 last year with the number 1 recruit in America, and then 7-11 this year. I think if after year 4, with a lot of juniors who have played a lot of minutes, if you can't put it together and get the NCAAs with that team, I think it's probably tough to make the justification to that fan base that they don't need a coaching change. Is that fair?
I think so. And I think one of the things, J.J. Frazier, who, as we know, one of the most exciting players, I think, in the SEC in years, like just in terms of what he did at Georgia. He tweeted out after the game last night, or no, it was actually he did it this morning. He said, the tweet was, he said, honestly, if y'all really still think that this is a home run hire, you're fooling yourself. I once did, but not anymore, and it is what it is. So, like, that's the kind of stuff that I think you start seeing. That's going to push fans in a certain direction. And look, he came back and said, hey, that's just his opinion. And he has every right to his opinion. He played there, and like he pointed out in some of the follow-up tweets that he had, he's like, hey, I put my heart and soul into this program. I want to see Georgia be better at basketball. I want to see them back up there, and have that opportunity. And that's kind of what he said. I don't think he was meaning it maliciously towards Tom Crean. I think he was just saying, hey, this is a program that, I want to see this program succeed. And I think that's what Georgia fans want too, because you did make a hire from a guy that took a team to a Final Four. The Indiana thing, I say so many times, I still don't think Tom Crean gets enough credit for what he did at Indiana. That job was a mess when he took over. And that's just an unusual job, though. The circumstances are completely different. But I do think there starts to get a little bit more, the heat starts to turn up a bit next year if they struggle again. Because, again, like I said, you've already got someone, a former player that everyone loved, coming out saying this kind of stuff. Like, I think that's going to only make the expectations even higher. And whether fair or unfair, that's just the way it is in this SEC. You've got to be able to win games at some point. And I think that's what they're going to need to do next season to kind of feel a little bit better about things.
Well, this one will be fun because I have no idea where to go with South Carolina. I mean, just a weird year. They've got, like, if everybody were to come back, you look at this team and you say, let's say A.J. Lawson back for senior year, all SEC caliber player. Keyshawn Bryant played really well at times. He'd be a senior. Jermaine Cousinard, who didn't play last night for whatever reason, would be a junior. You lose Seventh Woods, but my goodness, everybody else is back. We talked about how COVID disrupted that season, but this just is not a program that's gone in the trajectory that I think we expected it would after Frank Martin got to a Final Four. Like, any guess on what this looks like for the Gamecocks next year?
I have no inside information. The season just ended, but I worry that this is the kind of season to where you think everybody should be back, and then all of a sudden, guys transfer or guys leave, or I worry about that because this was just like you said, it was a struggle. And again, the circumstances, the team that didn't play from December 5th to January 2nd, that's significant. And I have no doubt that that had a big part in them being as bad as they were. They could just never figure it out consistently once they came back from that long pause. But I do wonder though, like I think this is one of those seasons again where I feel like you can have a bit of a grind. And I think for the most part, unless I'm just forgetting guys, like Frank Martin's done a good job of keeping his players there. I mean, guys transfer, everywhere now. Like I feel like every school has somebody transfer every season. But I think for the most part, he's done a good job of being able to, keep most of his nucleus there. And so I think that's something that could be good for them, certainly, if he can do that, because they should bounce back and be a much better team if the circumstances are more towards normal than they have been. But I don't know. Like, I think that's one that's really up in the air for me because we kind of talked about it before, too. Again, no inside info, not saying this at all. But, I don't know. Is Frank Martin happy there at this point? Does he feel like he has the support there? Does he have the resources he needs to win consistently at South Carolina? That's what I wonder about. I look at it from all different directions, all different parties involved. I kind of wonder what is the thinking now when you're not so close to that Final Four run anymore. It's several years away now. Like you're looking way back at this point. Basically how long last year felt. So that's what I'm curious about with South Carolina, and I think they're going to have one of the more interesting off seasons maybe of anyone in the SEC.
Well, Frank Martin's body language was interesting to me at times this year. He just, like last night, most coaches are standing up and working the sidelines. He's just sitting on his folding chair a lot of the time. Not very animated. I think we saw some of that in Nashville when they just played a stinker of a game against Vanderbilt. He just looked like he was just resigned almost at times to whatever was going to happen. I mean, Frank is an intense, fiery guy, and just his demeanor on the sidelines this year was so opposite of what it's been. Now, look, the guy had COVID, and maybe that just wore him out. He's now shaved his head because I think of a condition there. I don't know that maybe we're ascribing personal things to the way he felt about the team when the guy might have just been out of gas. But it was interesting to see how that season played out and just how he handled it emotionally compared to the normal Frank Martin that we see.
Yeah, he tested positive twice. I think, that's something where I think it just took a toll on him. I really do. And that's what I said. I honestly think, the job itself can take a toll on you. We know that. Just the nature of trying to compete in the SEC these days. It's hard in and of itself. But I do wonder, from his perspective, as he looks at South Carolina, are they going to be able to be up there with these teams, or was that Final Four run just one of those magical things that came together? I start to wonder at this point because, for him, I've said this before, and this is not to knock South Carolina fans, but it's like even when they were winning, I don't know if he felt that the support was completely there, and I wonder. And look, I'm not putting words in his mouth. That's just me looking at it from the outside. But I'm very curious to see because you know what? If we had to rank South Carolina basketball right now, if we took Frank Martin out of the equation and had to rank that job compared to all the others in the SEC, like that's easily in the bottom three,
Bottom
right?
four job.
Yeah,
I think.
I was going to say, like, I think it's easy. I think it's in there, and that's again, I'm not knocking South Carolina. I just think that's where things are, even with a Final Four run, less than 4 years ago or whatever now. So I think that's the problem too, is recruiting. That kind of stuff, it's only getting more difficult in this SEC landscape, and that's what I kind of wonder about, sort of what that future of the program looks like, and what Frank Martin's future looks like.
Vanderbilt played well at the end of the year. I think that thing is totally dependent on what Dylan Dessou and Scottie Pippen Jr. do, whether they go pro or whether they come back. I'm not seeing those guys pop up in mock drafts, but you see kids leave that aren't in mock drafts this time of the year, and all it takes is one school, or excuse me, not one school, but one NBA program to like them to take a draft pick, or you can go play in the G League for a little bit and earn your keep that way. But I think, to me, if those two kids come back, this is probably an NIT team that maybe, if it gets hot, has got a chance to sneak into the NCAAs the way that Vanderbilt developed some guys like Jordan Wright and Trey Thomas, who were supporting players. Again, this is assuming everybody's back. The recruiting class for next year is not stellar. Now, if one or both those guys don't come back, I just don't see it happening. But that's what I'm watching, is do they get their best two players back?
And that's the problem. If they don't, they're literally back at square one, I think. You're back to where you were maybe when he took the job. And I know he's developed the other guys around him, but like those, we've said it, like those two guys are all SEC guys. And so I think that's the thing, is if they both come back, I'm with you. I think they're an NIT team and feel pretty confident about that. But I also think that they really could make that jump potentially back into that top half of the SEC and get an NCAA tournament bid, because we saw the development. Like, that team got better. You can't deny that. I mean, 8 of their 14 losses. I kept going back to the stat. And yesterday's loss to Florida only cements it even more. But 8 of their 14 losses by 7 or less points. Like, that's just crazy. Like, you're going to find a way to win some of those SEC games that you lost by 7 or less. I have to think, with another year experience, having your nucleus back, you're going to win some of those games next year. And what did they finish? 352nd out of 357 teams in KenPom and luck. Kentucky was the only power conference team that had it worse. And, what do you know? They both finished 9-16. So I think that's something that they're hard to know. Like, I don't know how you can even form an opinion on Vanderbilt until you know whether Pippen or Dessou are coming back. If one comes back and the other doesn't, I mean, I still think it's going to be a challenge, because I think you need both of them back to really make that big jump. But, it's a matter of two. Can they find some guys to bring in, transfer-wise, or younger guys, or whatever? Can they do that? If they can, then I think you have to feel good about where things stand right now based on what we saw at the end of the season. Now, again, everything can change just based on the fact of one of those guys leaving potentially. So that's the thing. Until we know that, I think it's hard to form an opinion on Vanderbilt, but I also think you can't deny the fact that this team absolutely got better. And, I think, kind of like we talked about, like I felt like someone was going to give Florida a little bit of trouble in that game, and I thought Vanderbilt did. I mean, they played pretty well for the most part, but, the Gators, Trey Mann back, they just played a little bit better. And so, I'm very curious to see, kind of with Vanderbilt. I mean, look, let's think about this. If Pippen and Dessou come back, like, absolutely, Vanderbilt's in a better position than South Carolina. I would argue Vanderbilt's in a better position than Georgia. That kind of stuff. Like, I really would believe that, as long as they're able to fill a little bit of talent around them, like, they will have 2 of the best players in the SEC next year. Like, 2 potential, and this is not being crazy. The SEC has 8 guys on the first, like, Dessou and Pippen are 2 potential first-team All-SEC guys. Maybe they don't both get it, but like, that's where they would be sitting. So you would think that the expectations would have to be a little bit higher in that scenario.
Yeah, if Dessou and Pippen come back, they're not playing the Wednesday games next year. If they both don't, then I think they are. And again, if he doesn't get both those guys back, they're going to have a long leash with him, because I don't see him getting this turned around anytime soon if they're gone.
No, I agree. And that's what I really do. Like, I feel like they're back at square one. If those two guys leave, I don't know what you really have to, you're talking about transfers. Like, you've really got to work the transfer portal hard, because I don't think it's just as easy as, going out and getting a freshman, So I think that's the thing that you wonder about. They're going to have to do that. And I feel like that, surely, I would feel like they understand that, and again, with the little more leniency you have now with the transfer portal and the transfer rules and all that, like, you can figure that out. Like, there are ways to get guys in there now. So, I'm curious, because they're one that's kind of an incomplete until you know whether Pippen or Dessou are coming back.
Blake, I know you've got to run. We'll be watching basketball here in a few minutes. Tell folks what we've got coming up at the 14. You and I both put out some written content last night at southeastern14.com. We'll be updating that throughout the day. Of course, baseball, don't forget about that. Some big series this weekend. Just give everybody a quick primer on what you've got coming up this weekend.
Yeah, our main feature on the site we've had is your kind of breakdown of where things stand seed-wise for the SEC teams. So you can find that at southeastern14.com. I put up, game stories with thoughts, what we just talked about, looking at like Vanderbilt heading into next season, Kentucky, looking at the Florida-Tennessee rematch we're going to have here on Friday, Mississippi State advancing. So we'll have game stories up for all the games that will be taking place the rest of the tournament. So you can find all those over at southeastern14.com. Be sure to follow our Twitter account at 14Southeastern. And I think, Chris, we're going to probably put together some more audio stuff for the weekend as well. So I know we usually do this Monday through Friday, but obviously this is a bit of a different scenario now with the tournament going on. So we may even put together some stuff for this weekend as well.
Yeah, I think we will. Well, Blake, thanks for joining us. Everybody have a safe and happy weekend. This is Chris Lee, the host here at the 14. Be sure and check our workout at southeastern14.com this weekend. Follow us at 14 Southeastern on Twitter. Have a great weekend. We'll catch you again Monday with another episode of the 14 Podcast.